Welcome to Breaking the Standard, where we are closing the communication and knowledge gap for the small business government contracting industry. I'm Aubrey Gainford, and today we have very special guest Laura Bennett with us. Laura, welcome.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
No, I'm excited to have you. If you could just introduce yourself for our listeners, that would be great.
Yes, I am a business development consultant. I started my business a year ago. If you want to go check out what I do, it's govconlaura.com. But I've been in federal healthcare for a very long time, supporting healthcare civilian agencies with business development and capture services for former companies, small, medium, and large. And now I've been out on my own for a year.
Well, congratulations. That's exciting. And today we're going to be talking about bidding RFPs and the companies, like what companies go through to evaluate an RFP, like looking at risk, and then how much, I guess, risk to take into consideration when you're building a proposal. I'm sure we could probably talk about this for hours, but unfortunately, we don't have a ton of that. But I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this. We know the bid and proposal process has a lot of pieces to it.
Mhm.
Can you briefly go over when it comes to bidding and things that, small businesses should consider?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when we look at the bidding process, it's different for small, medium, and large, and even 8A companies. Every different size that a business will go through will impact their bid process. And not only that, the dollar size and the complexity and scope of the opportunity impacts the bid process as well. But there are common attributes one should look at when it comes to evaluating an RFP. And the first questions you should look at are, do I have a relationship with the agency and the person putting out the requirement? Do I know the contracting shop? So you look at relationships. Another category is technology. Do you have experience with the technologies they are asking for? Do you have experience with the technology processes that might be involved? Do you have the capabilities to execute on the program? Another area to look at is past experience. Do I have the past experience that is similar in size, scope, and complexity to go after this procurement? I mean, there's even a FAR clause written for it. So those are some of the common attributes. And then you could also look at pricing. Can I price to win this? I mean, do we have the right labor categories? Do we have the right personnel and labor and staff mix? Another question to look at or category is contract vehicle. So you can kind of make a list of categories that you evaluate when you look at a bid. So you've got the people, so relationships with multiple people in that agency or office, the technology, so the tech stack and the capabilities, past experience, can we do this, right? And can I write to it and prove it? Do I have the proof of it? And then is it easy access? Do I have the right vehicle or access to the government? And then even looking at the price and staffing, can we price this well enough that there is a cost realism to this, but is it also competitive enough that the customer will take a look at what we have to offer and to buy it? And then there's other things you can kind of add in and take out, but those are some of the main elements you want to look at when you're a business evaluating an RFP.
Yeah, and it's so great that you touch on all of those because I think that sometimes one of them gets missed or left out, and so I think it's great to make sure that like just upfront that they take all of those into consideration. And so
Right.
um, risk is a word that not everyone associates with bidding and responding to a proposal to an RFP for a proposal. Can you talk about from your perspective how risk is factored or should be factored into the bidding process?
Yeah, I think the risk comes to like the bottom line for the business. And then there's also like risk when it comes to waiting for the when we're in source selection, right? Are we going to win? There's that period of time of you can't count the revenue. And then there's like the risk of transition and then delivery. So when you're a certain size business, you take on a certain amount of risk when it comes to putting opportunities into your pipeline and then also bidding them because it's like a notional idea. It's a future thought. And so when we build out our pipelines, you're building out from now, like, am I going to be bidding on something next week? All the way to a couple, 24 months is usually the standard. So it's kind of like you're building out your dreams, so to speak, dreams that you can research and use to build your company. And so a lot of it's notional. And when you bid work, there is a certain amount of risk being put into bidding the work because you have to calculate. And oftentimes the calculation or the P win probability of win is subjective, but you try to make it scientific enough that it can predict with some probability your chances, right? So there's amount of risk that can come into pursuing a deal, and a lot of it, a lot of it can change very quickly over a course of time. If you're bidding on an RFP that's coming out in 6 months, you've contacted the small business office and the contracting shop, they say, oh, most likely full and open. And then something happens a month before the procurement, and then you learn that it's small business. It's going to be a small business set aside. Then you have to like reconfigure the team. So there's even risk involved in waiting for the RFP to come out. And I think that's what you and I were talking about, like really in depth
Mhm.
before the podcast was, what kind of risk is involved in pursuing deals. And, you could kind of say, risk or the unknown is around the corner with anything you're pursuing. But if you're like an 8A, it's very concrete that you can get an 8A sole source and you know approximately what the dollar size will be. There will be some kind of relationship that gives you indication that you know what's coming.
Mhm.
But when we sometimes pursue deals competitively, that's where these unknown factors can come in. And sometimes when you turn the corner, something changes really quickly. I think even during the bid process, there can be an amount of investment and risk that's involved in these things too. Like if you're dealing with a multi-phase procurement, there's a lot of risk and investment, in my opinion, for small business, because what we're finding is these agencies will do a down select. The down select helps in some ways because you can cut the competition down significantly. And phase two of procurements can be quite costly in some ways. Like if you're doing a tech challenge or you have to pull together a team of experts to do a virtual presentation to the customer or in person, like
Mhm.
that can get pretty costly and very involved very quickly. So it's a matter of preparation, and that's why a lot of these companies will hire capture people. They'll make investments. They'll hire consultants that might convert to full-time staff, or they might, there's a lot of planning and preparation that goes into these types of things. So you're kind of minimizing the risk. But I think, risk can be involved throughout any part of the RFP, the bid and proposal process. And I haven't talked about it so much in terms of risk, but it's like, well, what do we need to do in case this happens? What if this scenario happens? And you're kind of like building up your plan so that
Mhm.
you can accommodate certain things that might change.
It's so interesting because I don't get to see that part of the process. I only get to see it once it's, finished and submitted. So it's really, I would love to be a fly on the wall one day when I'm not a CO anymore, just to see how the decisions are made to go with, this many people or this approach, and like what the conversations were, and like the trade-off between, well, we're willing to risk this for this, and if we don't get this, then that's okay. And just being able to like watch that entire conversation, kind of unfold, because I don't get to see any of that. I just get to see the finished product. So it's so interesting to think about all of the different pieces that are involved just leading up to sending in an actual proposal and having the team ready to go if you do orals, or, if you have a phased approach. I agree with you.
Hmm.
I think phased approaches are great for many reasons. If you get a recommendation to not move forward, it's totally up to you to move forward. But I think the government's doing you a favor by saying, we do not have confidence in you. And that way you can save some money, because
Yeah.
proposals cost a lot of money. But I do like phased approaches because I think it helps to give people a little bit of an out if they're like, okay, well, we tried, we didn't really get the
Yeah.
response we wanted, and we can go from there. But I uh I think I would love to have you come back and talk about on another time, and this is just my brain going off of a left field. So Brian Lindholm and I talk about protests, and we look at like different different decisions and risks that companies took, and did they
Hmm.
pay off or not. And so I think it would be really interesting to have you look at that too from where you are, because he does black hat reviews before
Oh,
companies submit. But he's been looking at protest decisions because you can learn so much from them. And we look at, well, what did the company decide, and did it pay off or not? Because sometimes the decision is upheld and sometimes it's reversed and they have to go back. But thinking about what you're talking about, to me, it just ties very much into some of those decisions and those conversations. It's just on the other end, um, because
yeah,
it was already awarded and protested. But I'll have to pick your brain about that.
yeah, for
When it comes
sure.
to small businesses, what would you say are questions that small businesses should be asking themselves um, surrounding risk? And I know it's going to vary. This isn't a one size fits all, because it might be a different situation depending on like the set aside or the requirement. But if you were to sit down with a small business that hasn't done this very often, or really, really wants to go after something, like what would you say? Like, these are the things you need to ask yourself, and these are the things that you really need to consider, like while you're going through this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it depends on the timeline, right? Because
Right.
sometimes that window
Hmm.
from getting
Hmm.
the RFP or identifying it to bidding it is very short. I think it also depends on like the size of your business and the trajectory you want. The most dangerous thing you can do is not to bid anything for months, right? Because if you're sitting there and you're just looking at things passing you by and you're not going out there and taking the risk to go after something that might make common sense, but might not be the closest to to like the highest P win you have, you're losing out on potential revenue. And a lot of people are advised not to bid those winning deals. But the problem occurs is that your backlog is going to shrink if you're not bidding anything for months on end. And then that cliff's going to come and you'll be looking back at your data points and you'll see that there's nothing in the queue. So I would say, the most dangerous thing is to not bid anything for a long time. I would be very concerned about what's going on and why is this happening and how can we turn that ship around. So at some point, you need to be bidding. It's kind of like brushing your teeth. And then over time, you can kind of develop that muscle of discipline, right? And I've seen some good advice out there lately saying, you don't want to come up with very complex captures as you're trying to grow. Maybe the black hat's not right for you at this size, but sit down and write down your list of competitors and maybe their top features, right? And kind
Hmm.
of develop that muscle over time and understand your capacity for bidding. And then over time, the data will show itself. Where are you winning and where are you losing? And what are your advantages? What are your strengths versus your weaknesses? And then you can sharpen the knife, so to speak. But you got to start going into the kiln and melting the sword or the metal so that you can fashion the sword and then perfect it, right? Masters are not made by not doing anything. They are made by watching and observing and then putting it into application.
Mm.
So, you know, what I talked about earlier with some of those categories you look at, um, a lot of small businesses have probably interacted with mentor companies or apex centers, even their business opportunity specialists, even small business specialists at agencies. But out there are a ton of um, templates for bid no bid, and some of those attributes I mentioned. And do you have the relationships? Do you have the technology? Do you have the capability? Do you have the past experience? Can you price this reasonably? There are calculators out there that a business can research. Maybe they can ask one of their friends. Maybe they can get in touch with a consultant and ask for like a template bid no bid kind of thing and then run through it, right? But I wouldn't use that as the final decision maker, right? Because you have to get in the gym and flex those muscles and lift the weights in order to know what are your deficiencies versus what are your strengths, and how do you sharpen the sword, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
my perspective is go out there and figure out what are those attributes that are important to you for bidding versus not bidding an opportunity. How do you assess it? And then go out there and bid and use that as a learning process as well, for starters.
I love that because I think there's a lot of conversation around like, don't go after too much, but there's not the conversation of don't make sure you don't go after anything because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of companies I think have to remember that you need to have something else to sustain your company while you're going after these other opportunities. And so, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, but I think it's a really great point to, you go after something and you don't win, okay, you can take what you learn from that and then apply that and then go after a couple more things. Now, I'm not saying go after a bunch of stuff because depending on how small your company is, you probably have like 3 people doing 8 jobs. And so you might only be able to go after a couple of things, but go after things. And I love that. I love what you're saying because you won't know until you actually go out and get yourself out there and then be able to
Yeah.
get the feedback and the experience and the learning and you could win. You might
Yeah.
actually win. So that's such a great point. I never thought about it from that side. I've always had the like
Yes.
don't go after too much at one time.
Well, but there's a lot of common sense in it too. And then, as you move up the chain and you go after larger things, that's where you get more picky. That's where a lot of that advice you see out there is really applicable. But I know a lot of businesses out there that don't bid, and I know a few that bid a lot, right?
Mm,
And so they're going out there and they've got an engine going because they want to grow. And so you can never escape the math, right? When it comes to growth and sales, you can never escape probability and the math of it, right? So if you're not bidding anything, you're never ever going to win. If you're bidding enough, then you're going to have enough to win, right? And then if you're overbidding, you might be doing a little too much and you might need to pull back a little. But you always want to have something in your backlog, right? When people build their pipelines, a lot of it's on notional ideas. A lot of it is very future looking and people look years out. And
mm,
so you're kind of moving things from one side to the other side, right? You're kind of moving in real time, bidding on stuff, and you're moving it from the notional to the backlog, and you always need something consistently regularly going into the backlog in order to sustain the growth of a company.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you have to do it. You have to kind of figure out what works for you, but you have to start somewhere is the one thing I'll say. And I as you mature, you can add more discipline, you can add more metrics, you can add P-win, you can look more crisply at certain data points. But overall, you want to take a look at what is it that you do well, and then where are your areas of deficiencies and how you can improve upon them.
I ask all of my guests the same two questions. So you've given a lot of really great advice already, but my question is if there was any advice that you would give to a small business currently in the GovCon industry or someone that's looking to get into this industry as a small business, what would you say to them?
Well, I would give two answers for that question, right? Because one, for a small business in the GovCon industry, it would be, looking at your pipeline and how do you optimize it as a tool to really use it to fuel growth, right? You can plug it in such a way and configure it that it can tell you really where you're going. Do we have enough opportunities in this stage to pursue? And is the pipeline big enough? Do I have enough opportunities for year one, year two, year three, right? So your pipeline can really be a very good tool for you. And so this is where BD Ops comes in, knowing the operational side. And
Hmm.
a lot of times we think of just the more external side. Do I have the right BD person going out and meeting with people? Very critical. But the BD Ops side is also very important because it's like the engine, right, in the car. And then for someone wanting to get into GovCon, I think there's a lot of noise out there, and a lot of people will start on social media, right? So they'll start on Instagram, they might start on YouTube, but I think the best thing you could do is go to sba.gov, start looking at that website and start trying to find like some of these government events and start attending them, and then getting yourself on sam.gov. I think probably those are very important things. And then figure out what you're selling, right?
Hmm.
And maybe stay away from like social media. Just I would say stay away from social media for at least 6 months if you can.
Hmm.
Really kind of learn from the government itself, because there's so many free resources out there that are put out by the government. That's where you should start.
I love that. No, it's that, and that's so smart. Because I feel like social media can influence us in one way or the other, or you need to make your own decisions and determinations and figure out what you want to do. So I think that's really smart.
Yeah.
Speaking of social media, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what would be the best way to do that?
They can find me on LinkedIn, obviously. Laura Bennett, I'm in the Maryland area. Govconlaura.com is my website. So they can go view what I do on my website. Probably LinkedIn is the best place to find me. I've also started a meetup group. It's focused on women business development leaders, and then women owners of small businesses, or women that want to get into GovCon. It's called Bridge Her Way to GovCon on meetup.com. And our next virtual meetup will be on October 2nd, and we're doing networking bingo.
I am not sure if this will air before that event goes
Oh,
live, but
yeah.
I'm gonna link Laura's LinkedIn information and her company information and the meetup group in the show notes. And if there's anything that you have questions or opinions about concerning what we talked about today, or if there's a topic that you're dying to hear me talk about that I haven't covered yet, please shoot me an email at breakingthestandard@gmail.com, and make sure to go check us out on Apple and Spotify and now on YouTube. Until next time, bye.